Excellent. Thanks, Delma, and welcome everyone, and glad you could join us tonight. We're going to cover a fair bit of information, not just on heads exit and entry, but also a little bit on the starting procedure to give you an inside running on what you can expect for the race as well. So hopefully there'll be a little bit in it for everybody tonight. So with the agenda, we're going to cover off the actual entering through the heads. We're going to be looking at the lighthouses and what you need to look for. I'll cover off the tides and where you'll get that information and how to interpret it easily. We'll then look at the communications that you will need to make with Lonsdale VTS, which is the vessel traffic services in the heads. We'll then go on and cover the actual, because on the 26th, you will all be at Blairgowrie, or most of you will be. And then how do we go from Blairgowrie to the actual start line? And it's also going to depend on the draft of the boat. And I'll cover off a little bit of the local knowledge so that you can get to the start line without incident. And then we'll finish off by actually looking at the race start, where you're going to go, and the processes that you'll be taking, or the process you'll be following to get out of the head safely without incurring any penalties. Okay, so first of all, this is just straight off Navionics, and so we're looking at the actual heads here. To the south of Lonsdale, which is the lighthouse on the western side of the heads, there is a pilot boarding ground just to the south of that. The ships will normally come out of the heads generally on the Great Shipping Channel, which is the centre channel, and we'll look at that with the lights and how you'll recognise that centred one. And then they come down to the pilot boarding ground, and quite often, not always, but quite often the boats will then turn to the west, where the pilot boat will then meet them to unload or load the pilot onto the ship. For you, you'll be coming up predominantly from the south or the southwest. So you will pass through that pilot boarding ground, and then you'll come in via what we normally call Four Fingers West, and then make your way, if you're coming up to the top end of the bay, through the Western Channel, and I'll talk about the options that you'll have there as well.
I love it too. So.
No, but then it.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the actual, first up, we're going to look at the lighthouses. Now, you do have a lighthouse here at Point Lonsdale, but this is not the one that you're going to use to guide you in. It just marks that head. The lighthouses that you're going to be using are up here on Queenscliff. And at Queenscliff, there's basically, well, there is the lighthouse to the north, which is a black lighthouse. I think it's one of only 3 or 5 black lighthouses in the world. So do have a look at it as you're going past it. And then down here on the magenta in the front area of the south is the lighthouses that will mark the various channels that you'll be coming in on, so you'll know where you are. So we'll have a look at those lighthouses. So on the weekend, I got down to the heads and I was able to take some drone footage for you. And particularly you can see the black lighthouse in the background with your red channel marker, your Great Shipping Channel, or the centre one, and then the green one, which is obviously the Eastern Channel marker. So that's what the lighthouses look like up close. This is what the lighthouses will look like when you're in the heads. So again, you can see there the Eastern marker, the centre one, and the red, which is going to mark the Western Channel. And then in the background, we have our black lighthouse. So Depending on the time of day you're coming through, it can be quite hazy, and sometimes those lighthouses, particularly with all the other houses around, can be quite difficult to see. The lights on the lighthouse, though, are very strong, and you will spot those lights. So the black lighthouse at the back will have a white light. And then down the bottom, I've just marked the chart down here so you can see where the boat would be. So as we move across to the to the eastern channel, you'll have the green light underneath the white light from the channel. And that way, if you've lined those two lighthouses up, then you are in the eastern channel as you're coming in. And then as we move further across to the west, you'll then get the Great Shipping Channel or the Centre Channel, and you'll have those two lighthouses with the white lights. And that's what you'll be seeing. You'll also see the red and the green lighthouses as well. As you get closer, one of these drop off because the angles don't show it, but in the actual channel itself, or in the heads, you will see this. And then as we move across to the western side, you're going to see the white over red, which marks the western channel. And then if we come further over, this is what we call 4 fingers west. And effectively, if you were to hold up your 4 fingers, they're evenly spaced between each of the lighthouses. And that one is what most of the boats will use when they're coming in or exiting out of the heads. The reason that they use 4 fingers west for entry and exit is that it keeps them out of the shipping channels, and therefore there's no issue at all with you going through the heads. You're going to be clear of all shipping because they're constrained normally by their draft, and they will either have to stick to either one of the channels or most of the ships will actually stick to the Great Shipping Channel in the middle. And so by coming in or going out on 4 fingers west, you know that there's never going to be an issue. You'll never conflict with any ships going through the heads. And secondly, the only thing you have to then look out for as you're going out is just where that ship is going to make the turn, potentially in front of you, to go into the pilot boarding zone. So again, that's what you're going to see in the heads. And as we can see here, that is 4 fingers west, because we can see that the lighthouses are evenly spaced with the black lighthouse at the back, creating our 4 fingers. And that's the one, again, that the boats will come in on. So let's move from Queenscliff down to the actual heads themselves and have a look at that. So the key things in the heads is there are a couple of dangerous areas that are quite shallow. What I've done is just marked on the map in the dotted red line. That's approximately the 4 fingers west line coming in, and so you can see where that takes you. But over on the Point Nepean, which is on the right-hand side, we have Corsair Rock, which you can probably hardly read there, but it's pointed at the end of the arrow. And then at the other end of the arrow points to the land on Point Nepean. Now, all of that area is generally underwater, but there's no way that you can safely navigate through that region. And quite a number of boats have already come to grief cutting the corner and hitting Corsair Rock. There was only an incident a few years ago where a boat had spent, I think, a number of years being refitted out and brought up to a beautiful standard, only to have the delivery captain run into Corsair Rock and write the boat off. They hadn't even got out of their heads. On the other side, on the western side, which is Point Lonsdale, you've got this reef that's very shallow, and there are breakers along that reef, and I'll have a photograph of that a little bit later on. But at the Point Nepean side, you can see on the map that there are depths, some spot depths there are 1.7 and 1.9. During the race, it's quite amazing how close the boats will run in along this area here. I've never been game to get too close in that area, mainly because that if you had a rudder failure, you don't have much space to manoeuvre before you'll end up on these rocks here. Okay, so let's have a look at your options. So as you're coming in to the heads, you're following that path. There's nothing to stop you from coming in on any of the channels. You can come in on the Eastern Channel or the Great Shipping Channel. Obviously, with AIS these days, you can see where the traffic is, and if there's no traffic around, you're quite free to go in on any channel you like. I just make it a habit of always coming in on Four Fingers West just so that I don't have to worry about it. So once you've actually made your way into there and you've actually passed through into the heads, you've effectively got 4 options on where you go next. You could go to Queenscliff Harbour, which is basically just there. Things to be careful of with Queenscliff Harbour is that you've got Swan Bay to the west, and it's only a very narrow cut into the harbour, and the current does flow through there through fairly strong, depending on the times. But there is fuel available in that harbour, and also there's the Queenscliff Cruising Yacht Club a little bit to the north of that, which is also a good place to stay. The other option, if you're coming to Geelong or to the northern parts of the bay, either to Royal Brighton Yacht Club or Sandringham, the Squadron or Royals or Hobson's Bay, then you would normally go up via the Western Channel. Good depths through there, I think in excess of around 4 to 5 metres of depth. You do need to stay between the red and green markers. To the east, it's very shallow. You're only talking a couple of feet in depth. So if you wander outside the green markers particularly, you will run aground. But it is quite wide when you're actually sailing through there, through those markers. They are very visible, and they're well lit up at night time as well. But that's the route that everybody takes when they're going to the top of the bay. The other option, if you're going off to Martha's Cove, or you wanted to take a slightly longer way, is that you can go down the shipping channel and then make your turn there and go north, or you can head off to Martha's Cove, which is just off to the right-hand side. And the other option, if you're not going, and I know I think Enchantress is going straight to Blairgowrie. So when you come in through the heads, depending on Enchantress's depth, you can follow the coastline through, and I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later on when we talk about the race start, because if you are going through there are some depth considerations and there's some alternate routes to get to Blairgowrie.
Thank you.
Sorry, you broke up there.
Oh, just thank you.
Yep. So we'll come back. I know Enchantress is going to Blairgowrie, so we'll cover that in a bit more detail, which will give you the information that you're going to need to get there as well. When you do come in through the heads, and you're even within even though the water will smooth out quite nicely once you get through, within that red zone, you do need to wear your life jacket. It is a legal requirement that they've introduced for the local rules. So just when you come through the heads, don't be in a hurry to take your life jacket off until you've actually basically cleared north-south of the actual lighthouses on you, and you're well and truly on the other side of those to the west of, to the east of them. Okay, so let's have a look at Port Phillip Bay itself. The reason that the heads are fairly dangerous is because we have this very, very large body of water, and as the tide rises up and down 1.5 meters, it will send a fair bit of water into the bay, but that water builds up momentum and then continues north. And so even though it gets to peak, tide at the heads and then starts to drop. The water continues to flow in until we get to about 3 hours after peak, and that then becomes slack water. And then after 3 hours after peak, it then starts to go into low tide, and the water then starts to turn around and go back out. It will then get to low tide, and the water will continue to be rushing out. And then as the tide starts to rise, it's then another 3 hours from low tide. So basically the rule of thumb is 3 hours from either high tide or 3 hours from low tide. That gets you slack water. And we'll look at how to actually get some actual figures on that in a second. This is a topography map of the sea floor in the heads. And you can see there was what was probably once an old river. It is quite deep. It gets down to 40, 60 metres. And because the river or in the sea floor has cut through, there are like cliff faces under the water. And so as that large body of water is moving out, a fair bit of it then starts to follow the channel as well, but then runs into those walls and then is forced upwards. And so when you're coming in just after slack tide, the water starts to look like it's beginning to bubble away. It's quite an interesting sight. Even though it can be calm, it gets that sort of bubbling effect in it, and then as it builds up, it then starts to look like it's going to bubble and bubble more from that, and that's caused by all this escarpment underneath. Okay, so let's have a look at the tides and what affects it, and what are the dangerous parts of entering through the heads. Generally speaking, we have southwesterly winds coming up from Antarctica. They, of course, build up a swell, and so predominantly, not all the time, but predominantly we will have a southwest swell running up through here. And then if we have a flood situation, then the current is moving, or the tide is then moving with the swell direction, and that has ramifications. But it actually starts to smoothen out the swell a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if we have an ebb where the current is going out, and then it's going against the swell, or worse again, going against the swell and the wind, then that builds up a dangerous situation. So let's have a look at the actual waves themselves. And so what I've done here is I've just drawn the swell moving through, coming up from the south. I'll just put a couple of yellow lines in there just to mark the tops and the bottoms, just so we can see where they are. So when you add in a current with the swell direction, as it is through the heads on a flood, then that has the effect of actually stretching out the swell, and can actually make it calmer as you're going through the heads. We've been out and had it wasn't uncomfortable, but there was a good swell running, and then we came through the heads at the same time it was flooding, and as we went into the heads, it actually became noticeably smoother because of that way that current was flattening that swell out a little bit. But the opposite is true. If you have an ebb and it's pushing against a swell, and also pushing against the wind, as you know, wind on current is not favourable, then what that tends to do is push or make the wavelength shorter, and of course that makes it stand up higher. And when that happens, you can expect to see waves like this in the heads. That is that they've been pushed up to a fairly sharp peak, means that, and particularly if you get a wave on top of swell, you can find that the swell has no back, and the boat comes crashing down over the top of it. So this is a photograph of a boat called Tavaki. Tavaki will be racing in the 50th Melbourne to Hobart yacht race. And you can see here in this photograph that was snapped, you can see that sort of wave starting to form there where the boats come off the top of it. Now, this would have been just after slack water. So obviously there was a little bit of wind and current going against it, and that started to cause that wave, that type of wave. If the race was delayed, for example, another half an hour on top of whatever this race, and I can say that this race was already delayed something by the fact that these guys were in these conditions, then this type of wave could be another half a metre higher again, or even another metre higher again. And once that sort of condition starts to happen, if you come screaming over the top of that in your boat, that's the time that you end up breaking your gear. And I know that for a fact because I was doing the Melbourne to Osaka yacht race. The race was delayed by a day because of heavy weather in Bass Strait. They got the race away, but there was still a strong swell coming in. And then I think we had a little bit of current at the time on the swell that pushed up these types of waves. And we made a tack, unfortunately, right over the top of one of these waves. And the boat literally just launched up into the air and came crashing down. And when it hit the bottom of that swell, we actually cracked the hull around the bow thruster, and we started taking on water. So we were going to Osaka, a 5,000 nautical mile race, and we hadn't even got through our first hour of racing, just trying to get through the heads. The long and short of it was we managed to put a repair in place, duck up to Sydney and get hauled out to get some repairs before we continued on. But these are the sort of things that your race directors will be very conscious of, and I'll be talking a little bit later on when you don't want to be coming through the heads to try and avoid these sorts of conditions. So if you bring up on your chart plotter, you'll typically get, if you bring up the tides for any of the areas, you'll get this type of wave, or not a wave, it's a pattern that gives you the highs and lows of it. And down here would be obviously a full ebb where the water is running out at its maximum speed. So you wouldn't want to be, this is a dangerous area to be trying to come in or out of the thing. We know that as a rule of thumb, 3 hours later, which will be somewhere up here, 3 hours later, this is where slack water will be, and then we come into a flood. And depending on the wind and that sort of conditions, this can be quite all right to come in through the heads in these conditions. Over on this side of the chart, I've pulled this out of the bomb site, and I'm going to take you in to show you where we get that data off the bomb site. But first of all, let's just have a quick look at it, because it is a little bit different to maybe some of the tide charts that you've been looking at already. So in this case, for Saturday the 22nd of October, we will get a slack water time at the heads. And that's obviously pointing to that time on the chart, which is around 3 hours after. Then the maximum time at 8:51 p.m. would be when we peak out. And we can see on that, it gives us a rate of 2.6, or let's just round it off and call it nearly 3 knots of water coming in. So if you're coming in at 6 knots, you're going to have another almost 3 knots. So you'll be doing nearly 8.5 knots coming in. But trying to go out, if you're doing 5 knots going out, then obviously with 3 knots against you, you're only be doing 2 knots. You're going to spend a long time. And this is why we don't want to be going out with an ebb as well, because you spend a long time in terrible conditions. So that's when it's falling, and we've got slack water again. But here we've got the worst time, which is at 3:12. We definitely do not want to be coming in here. And so what I do is when I look at these charts, particularly when you're looking at your chart plotter, because you will get these on Navionics as well, that shows this sort of graph. I tend to think of it like this, that anytime 3 hours after, when we've got a flood, that's not a bad time to be coming in. Bit hard going out sometimes because you're going against the current, but it's certainly better to be, you can go out. Otherwise, because you've got plenty of time going out, you can normally time it more accurately. Going out on slack time is the better time to always go out through the heads. But coming in any time in these green areas generally is okay for entering. And any time in the red areas is do not enter. just don't do it. It's just not worth the hassle. You know, if you can be spending a long time in there, and if the conditions are not favourable, your boat's rocking around, it's being tossed around, everything. We came in literally only 3/4 of an hour after slack, but it was going into an ebb, and we thought we might have been okay because we're only, like I said, 3/4 an hour in, but the current builds pretty quickly, and we ended up spending about over half an hour with full sails and the motor running pretty hard to try and power through it to keep the speed up, and everything ended up on the bottom of the boat. It was an absolute mess. So hard lessons learned. So let me just take you over to the bomb site, and we'll just have a look at how you get that particular piece of data, because it is a little different, like I said, to the other ones. So okay, so I've just got to stop presenting and reshare that screen. Okay, so we'll go to the bomb site. Scroll down to where you normally go, which is your marine and ocean. Scroll down again and you get to your tide predictions, which you're all used to. The difference here is that what you're probably not used to is down the bottom here, you've got these two radio buttons, and one says tidal stream. So if we click on that, then that just gives us these ones here, one at Mackay and one down here in Melbourne. If we click on that one, that's where we can get the actual slack and when the maximum and the minimum tides are. And you can flick through those to see. So as we come forward to race day, which will be on the 27th, here we are on the 27th. So 12, nearly 1 o'clock is slack water. So, you know, without even looking at the notice race, you'd expect them to probably get the race away, you know, around 12, a bit after. It's obviously going into a flood. So if the race is delayed any further, Delma, I might just get you to, if you could just turn everyone's microphone off, just getting a bit of background noise coming through there. So going into a flood, and it is a fairly strong flood. So if the race is delayed too long, we could have a fair current to try and navigate through to get out. But again, because it's a flood, it's the risk of any danger to us is reducing, so it's not an issue. This is different. If you probably would normally come in here to the tidal locations and then locate your location, then you will get a slightly different presentation where you're just getting simply the highs and the lows for that. Okay, let me just come back to our original one. Okay, so as you're coming in, when you get to 3 miles south of the Heads, you're entering into the Lonsdale vessel traffic service area. So you will normally be on channel 16, come across to channel 12. There is no requirement for you to make a radio call. However, it is good practice to do so. It also means that you establish communications with Lonsdale VTS, and so they know that if they need to talk to you, they know that you're already on channel 12. And what I would normally do is when I get to within 3 miles, which is generally about 30 minutes out for me, I will call up Lonsdale VTS, and the radio call I'll make is just simply Lonsdale VTS, this is Blue Water Tracks. No need to call them 3 times because they're already listening out for vessels. So they've got their ears on. They will then come back to you and say, Blue Water Tracks, this is Lonsdale VTS, go ahead. And then to save endless communication going backwards and forwards, I will then simply tell him that I've got an ETA of 30 minutes to the Heads, that I'll be coming in on 4 Fingers West, and that I'll keep clear of commercial shipping traffic. Now, the reason I say those 3 things, or 4 things, is it's so that he doesn't have to come back to me and say, now confirm you'll be clear of commercial shipping traffic, and then you have to say, yes, I'll keep clear of shipping. So there's a whole rigmarole that he'll have to go through, and by making a concise call like that, you're just getting rid of a whole lot of communications going backwards and forth. But like I said, because we're coming in on Four Fingers West, he knows that we're going to be out of the shipping channel, and obviously knows what we're doing. So we won't be a problem to it. Now, also, all of you will have AIS as well, because that's now a requirement for Cat 2. And so he will see you on AIS as well. So he knows that you're going to be there anyhow.
Okay, Grant, just before we go on, Dimitri, you had your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, are they watched 24 hours?
They are, yes. And you'll have, and ironically, I don't know what it is. I've come through literally sometime after midnight, and there's been 5 of us lined up across the heads. Spirit of Tassie was on the Eastern Channel. A freighter was on the Great Shipping Channel. Some other boat was on the Western Channel. A pilot boat was going out on the further out again, and there was another private boat coming in as well. But because we're on Four Fingers West, you don't have to care terribly much what they're doing, because you know that they have to stick to those channels, the other channels, and we've effectively got all that water to ourselves over at Four Fingers West.
Okay, Grant, just before we go on, we've got another question from Brian. So just unmute yourself, please, Brian, and ask away. Brian, can you unmute yourself hit the little microphone to unmute?
We'll come back to Brian anyway later once he's got unmuted. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we're now looking to the east of the heads. This is the channel going down the bottom here. We've got Blairgowrie. Far over here is part of the channel, and this is the one that I showed the line coming in if you're going to come to Blairgowrie. Couple of points to note is that off Portsea Pier, this is where our start line is going to be. So it generally will be from Portsea Pier out to a start boat. And then now if you're less than 2.3 on the depth, or you're prepared to risk it, then you can come down through this channel here. It's quite shallow, the depth. If you get through this little gap here, then it actually starts to get deeper as you go through. From Blairgowrie itself, if you're there the night before, having done the Cock of the Bay, or you're just down there with us all, then if your depth is less than 2.3 or 2.5, depending on the tide, then you could follow that route out and get to the start line. If you are going out, be very careful around this area here. It's very shallow. You do need to give it a wide berth, and there are marks around, but also quite often a few boats cut the corner here because they can't gauge how far they have to be off the area, and they end up running aground. I've bumped a number of times getting around this corner because I've also misjudged it, thinking I was wide enough but wasn't quite wide enough for it. That was in my previous boat. My current boat draws 2.7, so for me coming this way is not an option. So I will go out and take a slightly longer route down, and so again this is all shallow through here, but this is well marked. There's a marker here and a marker here. They are there, and this is quite deep in through all this area here, and then as you come up through this Rye Channel, it's pretty good all the way through here right to the very end. It's just here where you'll see the depth drop to about 3.2 3.3 meters. If your boat draws more than 3 meters, then I probably would recommend going slightly further again and following that route and coming out through here to get yourself to the start line. Once you're in the vicinity of the start line itself, the depths all through here is excellent, so you'll have no trouble manoeuvring around, and you can actually get quite close to the shoreline. It does get quite deep through there, and particularly going out here, it is quite deep all the way through. So there's no issues with that at all. So let's have a look at the actual start line now, and you go from the start line. You'll then head back up towards sort of the lighthouses, a little bit just south of the lighthouses, to a buoy, and then you'll go around the buoy and then make your way out through the heads. Now, the ORCV will have these points put on your AIS device or your chart plotter. They're courtesy of the harbour master. They will put them out there. We create an exclusion zone. The purpose of that exclusion zone is to allow shipping to manoeuvre in and out of the heads while we're racing, and to make sure that you don't go into the Great Shipping Channel and interfere with any of the ships going out. Unfortunately, we had an incident a couple of years ago where the fleet went out. One of the boats was in the Great Shipping Channel. The boat going out was a massive freighter, so it could not manoeuvre at all. He was honking his horn 5 times, did that for what seemed like a just huge number of times, and then in the end he just gave up and left his horn on, and that other boat was not going to move at all for whatever reason. We can't fathom it. So unfortunately, we had to have tea and bickies with the harbour master, and this was the solution that we came up with to allow the races to keep going through the heads. And so anybody who goes now into the exclusion zone during the race will be penalised. Again, they will be on your AIS chart plotter, but it's always handy when you get your notice of race or your sailing instructions, particularly to go through and manually put those in as well, particularly the A, the B and the C down here, so that you know when you and put a line between them so that you know, because you can tack right through here quite comfortably. And like I said, as the boats are coming out, you'll watch boats get quite close to this area up here. So looking at it, so I've taken this photograph from the lighthouses looking back out now. And so this is the fleet that we had going out on the weekend. You can see this is Lonsdale Lighthouse over here to the west, and you can see those breakers appearing on that order. And like I said, boats will come in relatively quite close to those breakers. It's quite amazing how close they'll get. But you do have, before those breakers and around that area, you've got good water all the way out and around here. So you've got good areas to tack all the way through, just tightens up a little bit as you actually come through the heads. And then once you get through the heads and you clear Mark C, then you're away. So with that, 40 minutes for our presentation. I think we got through it pretty well. Hopefully I've given you some insights into some local knowledge. If you do later down the track though, have any concerns or would like me to go over anything that I've been through tonight just to reinforce it with you, I'd be only too happy to do so. Just give me a call and we can do a quick Teams meeting to go through it again. But now if anyone's got any questions, you can unmute yourself and we'll answer them.
Okay, Brian, you're first up.
You can hear me, Grant?
I've got you, Brian, yes.
Grant, in times gone by, the Lonsdale Light has had black balls by day and red and green vertical lights by night, saying that it is illegal to enter in certain states of weather or ships coming in and out. Does that still apply?
I don't know. I've never taken much notice of those because I'll always talk to Lonsdale VTS myself. And if the conditions are marginal, then that would be the case as well. So, yeah, I can't give you an exact answer on that one.
Yeah, okay, thanks. The second thing is, does the Queenscliff Harbour have a temporary spot where when we come in, we can go in there to just reassemble, have a meal before we come on to Royal Brighton?
No, it doesn't. As far as I'm aware, you'd have to ring forward and see if you could get a berth, or they probably can allocate you a space to go to just temporarily if you phone them. If you needed to for whatever reason and you couldn't get hold of them, you could just go in and there is the fuel dock, and you could just go straight onto the fuel dock because that generally would normally be clear unless there's people fueling. It is a bit of a, unless you've been through that area there before, you've got to be very, very careful in Queenscliff Harbour because in the channel that you come in before you go into the marina, that water runs down there at quite a fair speed, and a number of boats have misjudged how fast that water's run, and as they've made their turn into the marina, they've got swept into the actual piles, but they've also been swept into other boats as well. So it's one of those sort of harbours that when you're going into, you've got to be well planned in knowing where you're going before you get there. And then once you know where you're going, you want to be keeping some speed on so that you've got good steering and the ability to manoeuvre easily.
Thanks.
I'm petrified every time I think of going in there. It does tilt up a little bit too. My boat's 2.7. I won't go into the actual Queenscliff Harbour itself anymore. The times that I've gone to Queenscliff, I've actually rang ahead and asked them if I could get a mooring or a pen at the end of the arm. So I'm still in the cut as far as getting, there's a fair bit of water, but at least, you know, it's much easier to manoeuvre straight onto the end of the finger, even though you're in the main channel, and get tied up than it is to try and manoeuvre in those areas with a bit of current running through it.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions at all? Okay.
All right. Well, that makes a fairly easy presentation. So I hope you've been able to get something out of it tonight, particularly the times to enter and exit the heads, and also you know, when you come in through the heads, how to make your way up the Western Channel if you're coming to the north, and if you are going to Blairgowrie and you draw more than 2.7, then it's recommended that you follow the channel down and come back the long way and around. But it's all well documented. The sands do move a little bit in that area, but not a great deal. And so what's on the chart is reasonably accurate. So with that, well, I'm looking forward to catching up with a lot of you guys when you get up here to Melbourne. And when we get down to Hobart, especially, I mean, the party will begin. And like I said, Sir Donald was going to be giving out, we'll be presenting these down in Hobart to everybody that takes part. So there'll be a beautiful medallion for everyone to take home. And you'll have certainly earned the yellow cap, which is one of the most prized caps in sailing.
That's great. So thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you in Melbourne.